Hi, Mphokolo.
Hi, Kanya. How are
How are
you?
you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you? Lovely to see you. It's been a minute.
Lovely to see you too. I know, right? How's Nairobi?
Nairobi is great. It's a bit warm. In fact, we've had lovely weather for the past few days. It's been raining,
Yeah,
but it's good to at least spend the weekend with a bit of sunshine and sunlight and get some vitamin D.
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I started off my day going to watch my son who had a match, basketball match.
Mm.
So at least we won. So then it's
Oh,
gonna be
nice.
a
What was
good,
the
so
score?
it's gonna be a good day for the rest of today.
Absolutely.
It's gonna
Absolutely.
be a good day. Mphokolo, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking out some time to speak to our community, the Kanya Pukoyo community. Cool. So I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to give a very brief introduction of who you are because if I had to talk about everything that you've done, I think we'd spend the whole day. So very high level overview of who you are, and then I'll get straight into our questions. Is that all right?
That's perfectly fine. And thank you again for having me.
Okay, cool. So Mphokolo has got a BCom degree with business finance, ecos, and marketing. She's also graduated with her honors in investment management. Your career in investment banking spans coverage, treasury, transactional banking, structured finance, and infrastructure finance. You are very conscious that Africa's infrastructure development is really a catalyst for economic inclusion and growth. Love that. Your expertise and skills have been developed through concluding transactions in many, many different industries, and those include in both the public and the private sectors. Just to touch on a few accolades that you have picked up along the way, I'll only name a few because you've got a whole string of them. But really, some of the accolades that you've been awarded with is by the Association of Black Security and Investment Professional for the Young Talent Award in 2006. The other one is the Project Finance Deal of the Year in 2016, and that was by the Government of Kenya Ministry of Health and General Electric Managed Equipment Services. A mouthful.
Yeah.
So to not waste any more time, I'm going to get right into it. Mphokolo, what does it take for one to actually become an infrastructure finance specialist?
Wow, Kanya, that's such a loaded question because, look, was it a linear progression in terms of me finishing university, finding a degree named and labeled infrastructure finance? The question is no. But really, I think I was really fortunate to have been in the banking sector, which is very much close to what happens in the real economy because the clients that we provide services to really are operating in live environments. So really, I was very fortunate to have joined a bank in being able to see and spot trends to some of the clients that we service in terms of what the needs and developments were. But again, as organizations restructure to right size for the market, such as the bank, I found myself within the discipline of infrastructure finance. Now, I think really where I was in my career at that point in time,
Yeah.
which was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s rather, it
Mm.
was at a time where development and sustainability and where a lot of debt forgiveness programs were being considered for various African countries which were indebted. Of
Okay.
course, what that came with at the time
Mm.
was developing the Millennium Development Goals of 2000. And that was only for developing countries. But
Okay.
of course, as you know, as people, economies, and industries got to know more about actually what the inequality looks like in various countries and societies, it
Yeah.
wasn't limited to developing countries, most of which our African markets fall within.
Okay.
And we saw the emergence of what is now called as the Sustainable Development Goals,
Mm.
developed in 2015, of course, which have I won't say an end date, but an achievement date and a milestone date of 2030. So I
Yeah.
think through all that happening at that point in time, I
Yeah.
found myself at a time where industries were changing to develop infrastructure, to facilitate economic access, to alleviate poverty, to ensure
Okay.
that people had access to basic infrastructure to
Yeah.
live, to provide trade, and to provide services. So being in a bank really helped in
Yeah.
that I found myself at the time another financial institution where we used to have leasing structures which would provide to various companies. But over time, what the bank discovered at the time was that the market really was moving towards optimizing and not being micro about financing structures, but finding the right structures. So how I found myself in the infrastructure finance discipline was really as a consequence of a bank restructure organizationally away from a focused area of asset finance, but more towards a broader area of infrastructure finance, purely because I also had the experience from asset finance, which could be applied in things like project finance and how you apply thinking and funding solutions to limited recourse financing, purely because of the scale of these projects. So I really think it was a combination of where I was industry-wise, but also what was happening economically, as I'm saying, in terms of the addressing of inequality, but also how you drive inequality correction through economic improvement, social improvement, but also inclusion generally, and what facilitates that being infrastructure at the end of the day.
Okay, sure. Very, very interesting. So almost finding yourself at the right place at the right time, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, sure. So Mphokolo, I mean, you are a seasoned executive. And really, I think as we journey through our journeys as in our careers, we obviously learn along the way, you know. So what is that one thing for you that you wish somebody would have told you earlier on in your career that you learned much later on?
It's a bit of a difficult one because you learn across the journey, right? And you reflect and you look back and you're like, if only. But I guess, to answer your question, maybe earlier on, my biggest regret would have been thinking I've got all the time in the world. And because of that, not necessarily being present in the moment and paying attention to detail. And I say that because often when you look at trends, it's easier to spot trends or to sort of come up with solutions in retrospect based on what was happening at that point in time. But if you find that you are really present and in the moment, you're able to read the room, you're able to read the unsaids, you're able to read people's across the table, you're able to read body language and see what is unsaid. So I would really say being present and in the moment and not taking that time and moment for granted.
For granted. Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Sure. So you do a very big job across Africa. So what would you say for you in terms of what you do on a daily basis is the one meaningful thing about you, the role that you play?
For me personally, and I think I've been grateful to have had a career trajectory where I've been exposed to many functions within financial institutions, banking specifically. And really where I found myself in infrastructure finance, what resonated with me was the fact that you are providing financing to tangible outcomes such as projects or developments, which you're able to say, I was a part of building that road. I was a part of, you mentioned the managed equipment services transaction. I was a part of providing a solution to the government of Kenya in providing universal healthcare through working with companies like GE to provide equipment which could diagnose. So it's things like that which touch the lives of people, whether it is yourself as an individual and your well-being, such as healthcare, water, sanitation, as well as things like how do we facilitate livelihoods, roads, rail, and seeing those come alive and really, really, really looking at what the long-term impacts of those projects are to individuals, communities, and basically industries to provide sustainability and a livelihood more than anything else.
Yeah, sure. I think you posted, I think it was a week or so ago, about I think it was a bridge, one of the big bridges that you actually were driving across, which is some of the infrastructure, right, that you physically then can see and touch at the end of a very long process, I would imagine, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's things like that, really. I was not part of that project.
Yes.
But I guess because you look and you see what kind of transformation these sort of projects have. This was specifically in Lesotho. If you look at the topography of that area, without those roads, which were primarily built to transport equipment that was being used to build that bridge up to project site. And subsequently, because you can't dismantle a road once the project is done, that road has been so transformational in allowing communities to move and facilitate the movement of traffic,
Yeah.
people, and just to get from one place to another. So it's also the ripple effects and the
Yeah.
indirect effects that such projects really
Yeah.
do to contribute to economies, which otherwise would have been forgotten for all intents and
Yeah.
purposes.
Sure. That's incredible.
Mm.
So obviously to get to where you are, it's never a smooth ride. It's never an easy ride, you know. So maybe just share with us just some of the challenges that you obviously had to try and overcome to get to where you are today.
Mhm. Look, and I think everybody must do the work. Doing the
Yeah.
work means also assessing yourself. Who am I? What do I have? And what do I bring to the table? And
Yeah.
I think often what I found in this industry, which is predominantly male dominated, science dominated, maths dominated, and I've got a commerce background.
Mm.
So it's also about being able to spot to say, how do I plug myself in, for lack of a better word?
Mm.
Now, again, being a Black female, and people always laugh at me when I say I'm very cognizant that as Black females, we're at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah.
But, you can sit and wallow at that, or
Yeah.
you can say, okay, what am I bringing to the table?
Yeah.
And am I cognizant of who I am within the status quo?
Yeah.
And really, what value do I bring to these conversations? So
Yeah.
the difficulty is not always easy to see, was really about where do I need to upskill myself? How do I have the right conversations? How do I show up at cross tables, even despite the fact that, fortunately, I think my career catapulted at a time where South Africa was really focusing on things like Black economic empowerment, and more so in the workplace to say inclusion and including women and Black people. So I really also was a beneficiary of that program, which
Yeah.
again, one can never forget. But
Yeah.
those programs give you a platform. It's
Yeah.
about how you do the work and how you show up. So
Yeah.
for me, I think that's a daily and constant reminder of myself to say, coming across very smart, very accomplished, internationally experienced clients and people, how do I do the work and show up? Now, if you don't always have the same profile or competence, people can brush you over. Who is this Black young girl?
Yeah.
I'm short in stature as well. So, in terms of presence, it's not readily obvious.
Yeah.
So what I've had to do is really master my craft in terms of being curious, reading, attending industry conferences, finding people who I look up to in the industry where I can really say, what, not in the room, but hey, what does this mean, right? For example, what does a debt service reserve account mean? What does it achieve?
Yeah.
And because you really show value to people in terms of what you can bring to the conversation,
Yeah.
and they understand why you're curious, people are prepared to take the time to help out. It's not always easy because as a financier, you're meant to be front and center, know it all. But at the end of the day, you're also solving problems which are unique, but also having to have the confidence up front to appear as if you know everything. So I'd say it's having the confidence, but also the humility to know what you don't know when you don't know. And stepping aside to say, this I don't know, I need to go back and equip myself in order to contribute to the table. So I think that's a very generic example I can use. But all these, I think as I have progressed from being a specialist in terms of my profession, and as I've grown towards a leadership role, really, I would say the most challenging part for me has been leading people, because you're leading very smart, very opinionated, and very experienced people.
Different.
And sometimes leadership isn't always about your technical abilities. It's about your ability to connect. And sometimes your style, your tone can be misinterpreted. In fact, a friend of mine, it's a tribe in Kenya called the Luo tribe. He often says, the same word said in a different tone can mean very different things.
True.
And I'm often accused, so to speak, of being quite abrupt.
Yeah.
So for me, it's something that I've had to look at myself very closely in terms of saying, as opposed to saying, this is who I am, take me or leave me, having to take a step back and say, some of those reflections or communications of how people experience you aren't always positive, but taking those back and saying, ultimately, it's about what that feedback is meant to do to make me a better person, to make me a better leader, in order to achieve the same objective organizationally. But what I can say, moving to Kenya, different country, different organization during COVID must have been the hardest for me. And it was also an opportunity for me to also take a step back and, like I'm saying, self-reflect on the feedback that I received in terms of, culturally in South Africa, we tend to be quite frank, abrupt, and real about things. And taking a step back to say, it's not how things are done here. You might not like how people are experiencing you, And just because you're coming as an experienced professional technically, you need to really back down and bring yourself to people to understand their social cultures and norms, in spite of the feedback that might not be nice when you receive it, but ultimately bigger picture. Sure. It's not about me, it's about the organization and really about how I communicate with people. And it's a constant learning because people are different. Experience them differently in every way. And it's really about, even when you get that negative feedback, not personalizing it, but saying, how does this feedback, this piece of feedback, help me become a better person, but also help me communicate to achieve a common objective, which is bigger than two of us or whoever is around the table as individuals.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's powerful, hey? And I think, you know, as you were talking, I'm thinking, so even for somebody listening, it doesn't necessarily need to be moving to a different country, but just moving to a different company, right? Because all companies have different cultures, have different ways in which we do things. And so the importance of being able to just read the room and where you are and adjusting yourself. Very, very powerful. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Mphokolo, as a leader, you obviously are always looking for talent in the market. So what for you are some of the attributes that are very important that you look for when you are looking for somebody to join your team?
It's interesting because I guess the obvious point would be have the qualifications. But the baseline needs to be then, just to go back to the point I was saying about do the work. I think at a very basic level, the expectation is that you have done the work in that you're qualified to analyze and interpret information and data. And that could be quantitative information, qualitative information, but also to read the room and engage with people. But I think that last part of being able to read the room is probably the most difficult because it doesn't come naturally. It comes with experience. It comes with personality. It comes with coming out of your comfort zone to communicate and connect with people in order to find the right solution, but also to build trust with people such that they're able to articulate, and I'm talking from a financing perspective, they're able to articulate what their challenges are and what they're trying to achieve in order to find the right solution, which we as financiers do. So that being what I think is often the most difficult part of skills, and it's constantly growing, which is more reading the room. I would say I would look for somebody with emotional intelligence. I mean, does that mean you're able to keep quiet or keep quiet without being told to keep quiet? Talk when you talk, but also knowing when to listen and when to stop. But again, it goes to reading the room. Reading the room can mean many things, but it's also about understanding the unsaids, even though you might be in the physical presence of somebody. So for me, really, that is probably what is most important, but also having the ability to understand authority and rank without it necessarily being through an organizational structure. Somebody like, for example, you know, often we deal with executives and clients who've got very busy schedules. And a simple thing like setting up a meeting, which you can perceive as being important because it creates an opportunity for you and the client to engage. You often have to go through the person's personal assistant or executive assistant, who then needs to, in their minds, sift whether your meeting request is a priority or not. Now, if you come with the arrogance of, I'm an executive and therefore I want to see my counterpart, the executive, and you're just a PA, they can block you. So reading the room is also part of that. And like I'm saying, understanding authority and rank within a situation without it necessarily being within the context of an organizational structure. So that is, for me, when I say when you've got to have the EQ to be able to do many things which are not written or given to you on a piece of paper, but to help you navigate as we deal with people and situations in a way that creates trust, comfort, and achieves a common objective in the long run.
That's difficult. I've always just found EQ to be so difficult because how do you teach someone that, or how does one develop that, right?
It looks, and self-awareness is a big thing. And I think it's a constant thing that we're always learning. Like I said earlier, even myself dealing with people, it does not mean that because you might have the technical knowledge and be superior technically, it gives you the right and authority for people to listen to you. They might be in the room to hear you, but it does not give you it does not give you the right to think that they'll listen to you.
Yeah.
It's for you to do the work to build that trust in order for them to listen to you. So it requires knowing yourself and doing the work, but also, again, knowing within the hierarchy where you fit in at a point in time, in spite of what your official title may be at a point in time, because trust takes a long time to build, but also one misstep or one instance of disrespect can really sour or soil that relationship. In fact, it's an example my mother always says to me, fortunately within the environment that I operate, I'm fortunate to have help in the form of, somebody to help me in my home. And I always say, without someone to help me in my home, simple things like coming home late at 10 o'clock and worrying that curtains aren't closed, it's dark, can be something that niggles at the back of your mind and stops you from being fully functional in a meeting that's overrunning. But because you know the importance of this person who is taking care of your home, is a domestic work, but it's not within your profile, the same executive. But the importance is so important to me, because if I know my home is being taken care of, my doors are locked, I will not come home to the possibility of a broken into home or to a dark home with curtains closed. For me, it's just also appreciating those kind of things. So she's always said to me, Mphokolo, you might be an executive, but understand that these people also play a particular role. So even on days where they haven't understood you, because you come and communicate to them in a parlance or in a tone that you're used to at work, of course, they will never understand you. Of course, there'll be a tension because you're not meeting them where they are. You need to meet people where they are, including your domestic worker, but don't ever make them feel inadequate by virtue of the fact that they aren't in the office. But think about the comfort that they create in your home to allow you the freedom not to have small concerns worrying you and letting you be suboptimal at your work. So it's one thing I always remember to say, they might not argue back because, they're of course doing a job that they need, but never make them feel inadequate. And it goes, for me, it's something I always remember because I think it's something we take for granted by virtue, again, of rank within a social setting, but rank within my livelihood and well-being of my social life. They're just as important because absolutely, because without them, it's important. And I remember we had a conversation with yourself just as the year started, with your help, and you were stressed. So I could empathize. So they are so important to our well-being and our cycles and planning, that how you treat everybody in your life in spite of their rank, but by them just being a part of your life is so important. So never make people feel inadequate, because them literally breaking away from that system of yours can really cause so much more damage than that one incident that you might think is insignificant, just by virtue of how you make a person feel at a point in time.
Agreed. Listen, I agree with you fully. You are preaching to the converted, so I've experienced it firsthand. So you speak about working at 10 o'clock at night. And obviously, I think, we all are aware that it takes that to get to where you've managed to get to from a career perspective. So how would you advise somebody, in terms of how does one set boundaries between work and maybe personal life? Is there even such a thing? I don't want to call it a balance because I believe it doesn't exist, but how do you create those boundaries that you actually still have a personal life and still rise to the ranks that you've been able to from a career perspective?
I mean, as you said, can you really say there are boundaries, right? And what I always say is, if you strive to do what you enjoy, you will find that more of that clinical, linear, and hard boundary language use lessons, because ultimately, if you do what you enjoy, you will learn to find a prioritization and setting back of some things, because this takes priority at this point in time. You can never be 100% of anything 100% of the time. So it's always about prioritizing, but also understanding what the trade-offs of prioritizing one thing over another means. So for me, really, it's about to say what is important right now, and what is the consequence of that which I choose to put in the back burner away from what's important right now. But again, I think, with time, one is fortunate to build trust with people that even if I say, I am sorry, I can't make this call this evening because I've got dinner with my friend, for argument's sake, who's visiting me from South Africa, right?
Yes.
At this point in time, you don't come to Kenya every day.
Yes.
I need to prioritize this evening with you. But the people who I'm disappointing, even if it's at work, can only ever understand if they know that this is a once-off event. I don't always, choose not to work late because I'm always at a dinner. But I also need to contextualize to say, is this an ordinary dinner with a friend I could meet tomorrow that I know that over the weekend? Or is this one that in this moment, this can never happen again? And therefore, it's a trade-off that I've got to make. Now, that's just a very simple example because all boundaries and trade-offs aren't always made in a mode of crisis. But I think it's really about how you conduct your life for people to trust and believe that when you do make those trade-offs, it's not because you don't regard them as less important, but right now, I can't do it. But also very most important, communicating to say, I can't do it right now, but I'll do it for you tomorrow. And then trusting that if they don't get it from you right now, they know that what they'll get from you tomorrow is of good quality, consistency, and they can trust that they don't need to literally have sleepless nights because I've not delivered what I needed to do last night. I said I'd do it tomorrow. So it's also about a responsibility in knowing that if you create those boundaries, and if you're saying no at this point in time, you're responsible to make sure that what I can't deliver now, I'll deliver tomorrow. But also knowing that I'm communicating that very well and that there's a trust in how I'm communicating when I say no to the person I'm saying no to. That I'm not saying no because I'm being irresponsible. I'm making an informed no and them trusting that if I'm saying no, there's a fundamental reason why I'm saying no and I will make it up in a future and a point in time. So I would say it's a very difficult one to say boundaries. And as you said, balance, but it's really about, what's important right now? What can I compensate right now? And also, what is the consequence of me not doing what I need to right now? But all these things have long-term effects and consequences. And I think it's really a personal matter to judge what setting boundaries and saying no will be received by the other person. And if you don't communicate exactly why, what that trust deficit could be in future, in you being given an opportunity again to either deliver what it is that you are saying no to right now tomorrow, or that opportunity going away forever because somebody believes that you're just not interested. So it's really a fine balance. But I think that ability to do that comes with a responsibility of having created the trust over time and also reassuring people that you will deliver and communicating that very effectively without necessarily putting yourself in multiple places at one time. Because if you do that, something will suffer because you're not fully present at a point in time. You're trying to juggle many things at a point in time, which isn't always effective or efficient.
Yeah, sure. That's very, very informative. Mphokolo, gosh, I'm mindful of the time and I don't want to go over what I promised to take in your time. But I think we've got time for one more question. And I think you alluded to this earlier on, just in terms of continuous learning and making sure that you're always on top of your game. So just wanting to ask you, how do you ensure that you are continuously learning? What are the things that you go to ensure that you are continuously on top of your game?
It's a difficult one, right? Because are you ever on top of your game, right? Because if that was the case, then to be quite honest, I wouldn't be working right now. I would have mastered it. I'd be retiring somewhere, on the beach, getting some vitamin D. But
you've really got to work.
You got to work, right? You got to work, right? You want the nice things and the comforts. You got to work, right? That's a trade-off of giving away free time. You got to work, right? But for me, really, I would say I'm fortunate that I enjoy reading. So that's always been for me a source of creating that baseline of knowledge. And then once I've got that baseline of knowledge, being able to reach out to colleagues, career professionals, friends like yourselves, Kanya, who all of us are going through a process at this particular life stage of ours, where we are transitioning from either middle management to senior management, or are now in charge of teams, or are being given added responsibility. So I think most for me is that professionally, I work with a team, as I've said, of highly experienced individuals. So it's always easy to sense check and ask questions with them. But to also respect that, people's time is limited. If I'm going to ask for help, let me be specific about what I'm asking. Haven't done the work of basically understanding how things work, and I'm asking for clarifications. Because if I'm not prepared to do the work myself, there's no way I can expect somebody to take their precious time, which they could never get back, to do the basics for me, which I haven't taken the time to do, and which often comes across evidently in how you phrase a question and the response that you get from people. But on other, subtle matters and on other situational matters which involve people, leadership, growth, situations, the transition as our careers develop, I think I'm very fortunate to also have professional mentors who have also built a comfort and a relationship with, including clients who over time, you've understood their problems, and you learn to create a trusted advisor relationship with them. And it's vice versa, right? So I always say, if you can phone somebody at 9 o'clock at night, at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they answer your call, you know that they also respect you enough to know that this call that I'm picking up isn't a waste of my time. But it's also having done the work for them to trust that you're not going to be calling them in odd hours for something that's irrelevant, right? And at that point in time, it's often because either it's a matter of urgency. I've got this meeting today. Can you give me a sense of what's happening in Nigeria? I'm not in Nigeria, but can you just give me a lay of the land, right? And because those things are not things that you can read often in paper, or you can read in paper, but they're also other dynamics, subtleties, also on economies, which you've got to be aware of if you're going to be engaging at those levels of policy makers and decision makers and clients who are making very big and fundamental economic decisions in terms of where to spend infrastructure. And then really from a personal level, I think I'm very fortunate to have friends like yourselves, right? I mean, let's take the example of this podcast, and I'm so fortunate and honored to be on it. I mean, we had this conversation during a walk in COVID. We were just catching up, sharing where we are personally, professionally. And you were telling me about this idea, and I'm so glad that it's come to life, right? It is 5 years later, but what that shows is that all this comes with doing the work, preparing, refining, and understanding. And I think it's also through those engagements, Kanya, where I find for me personally, they are most impactful, because there are some things that will be said to you organizationally in terms of, this is what the strategy is, this is where the business is going, this is how we expect you to do it, right? And then you're left to your devices because you're seen to be emotionally mature enough to understand how to read different people, but also how to align people with the strategy. But nobody will say to you, there is a book that says, if you talk to this person in this way, you will achieve this. It doesn't work like that, right? So as we go through those difficulties and the difficulties of being known as a difficult boss, those are things that are not easy sometimes to have conversations about with your colleagues for various matters. Some will be genuine, some can use it to their advantage, to your disadvantage, but it's through friends like you who are also in similar positions in various economies where we are now rising up to be the next generation of leaders, but are dealing with the same issues, where you can say, hey, I'm having this challenge with this situation with this colleague, and I'm finding, that this working from home thing and me phoning at 6 and wanting this is seen to be as enriching and not keeping office hours. How do you deal with it, right? Because if I look at our generation, if your boss called, you picked up that phone.
You just make
Nowadays, there are boundaries, right? You don't pick up that. If people you phone, it's like you're disturbing my personal time. You're causing me distress,
anxiety,
right? It can become an HR issue, right? So it's also those softer things that you've got to know who to reach out to, but also to have genuine and frank conversations with people who are going through similar things, who can say, hey, my friend, this is what I've often done in my environment. I mean, we're in two very different disciplines in terms of industry. You're in the motor industry, I'm in finance. But discipline-wise, you're a management executive, so am I, right? You're in HR, I'm not. So there are very many things, like I'm saying, that we can learn from each other through friends who can have an open and frank conversation with you, but situationally have a context to give you that advice that nobody else can give you, which isn't in a policy, a framework, or a strategy document. So I think there are various sources, but to wrap it up in a nutshell is I read a lot. I have to read a lot. You can't engage clients confidently if you don't have a baseline of at least what's happening in the environment. I think with the advent of the internet as well, it's quite nice to have, reliable media sources that you can go to. but
Yeah.
also reports. Reports tend to be a lot more detailed, which is often how I actually spend some of my Sunday afternoons to say, if I want to be on top of my game, I at least need to read one research report on a Sunday to be able to help me to navigate through the week, to have very broad conversations from where are interest rates, what is the US policy on aid, how does aid affect government budgets, which projects are going to be cut because budgets are now reduced. And, it's quite broad and different topics, but you must be able to at least hold a basic conversation, but also to a point where if it comes distinct, and you can't address a particular issue, I'm comfortable enough to ask that question in confidence in terms of a conversation that is leading somewhere, than a conversation that is one way, where I'm also not adding value to the person who is explaining to me what is happening. So it's really a combination of reading, colleagues, mentors, and really friends who are in a similar position, who can have real and frank conversations about growth and how to navigate where we are in our life stages, as well as in our professional stages.
Oh, my friend, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
You have said a
much. Thank you
mouthful,
so
and there
much.
are so many nuggets that people are going to get from this. Kanita, I appreciate you. Love and light to you. I love what you do. I love how you do it. You are a kick-ass boss, and thank you, my friend. And continue rising. Huh?
And thank you. And I don't take it for